I think with the ideas we were talking about earlier on.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Keith. Yeah, morning everyone. So Anne Sin was going to do this talk, but obviously isn't here today, so I'm kind of jumping in. So there may be some things that I'm not fully abreast on, but should really cover most things. So we've already kind of discussed that one of the things a lot of groups want to know is how do you get hold of specialists? How do you pay for specialists? And where do you even start? I think you have to press it first and then it works.
No. I think you can press the arrows on the keyboard like
I think it's. I know you want to. Hang on. Yeah. Oh, the joys of technology. Sharing now. Yeah, possibly. There we go. Right. I think this is why we did archaeology, so we didn't have to deal with technology. So, just a few things to consider on funding a project. These are the kind of the questions we should all be considering before we go anywhere near trying to dig a site. And I think oftentimes these things get overlooked. Our commercial colleagues have to do this well in advance. And I think a lot of the time with our community groups, these may be overlooked somewhat. So this is some of the guidance that the Council for British Archaeology have put together. Pre-planning, consider project management. Have you got someone that can manage your project, or do you need to hire someone to manage your project? What professional input are you going to need? If you should know, if you're going to target a site, what kind of information that site is going to bring you in terms of what finds you might come across, what geology you might encounter, and that should give you a bit of a steer on what specialists. You know, if you know you're digging a Roman site, you know you're going to need a Roman pottery specialist. You're likely to need animal bone specialist, and you might need someone to deal with your metalwork finds. So at the very beginning, before you've even dug something out the ground, you should start knowing which specialist to have. And in terms of a list for KAS to host, that is something we could do, and particularly one for people who are local to Kent or working in Kent. There are lists on the Chartered Institute for Archaeology website, if anyone's looked at that. And there is also a search for specialist function on the British Archaeology Job Resource website as well. How up to date they are is a good question, because specialists come and go a lot of the time. And we're always looking for new, younger specialists, because a lot of the pottery specialists and everything are of the original archaeology generation, and they are, unfortunately, we've lost Malcolm Lyon, we've lost Nigel McPherson Grant, just two pottery specialists in Kent that know practically everything there is to know about pottery in Kent. Your labour requirement, so how many people might you need on site? What's that going to mean in terms of your cost of tools? What permissions, others have mentioned, permissions from landowners. Is your site scheduled or near to a scheduled site? That's going to have an impact on your costs, on whether you can even do your project in the first place. Scheduling, how long are you going to be there for? And obviously that will impact on costs. So your project management, who is going to take charge of your project from actually putting in a funding bid? If you were to say, go to the Heritage Lottery Fund, that is a really tough job. For anyone, has anyone in this room actually put in a bid for Heritage Lottery funding? Keith? Yeah, obviously, yeah. So as you will know, it's a really, really long process, and there are a lot of hoops to jump through. Hence why there are professional grant bid writers that do these things. It's worth considering, do you need to contact one of those and find out if they might be able to help you, so that you can then get the funding that you want for that project. And you need to consider it all the way through the life cycle of that project. Because at the end, as Elizabeth mentioned, your finds need to go somewhere. That may have a cost. And it needs to be published. You know, it may take 6 months. It may take decades with some sites. But oftentimes, the one reason for sites not being published is because there's been no money put aside for post-excavation work. You know, your finds processing, your specialists, and your report writing. It needs to be considered right at the beginning. And that is one of the challenges, I think, that we've all probably faced with. That hopefully we will be able to provide some guidance on that one.
So that doesn't actually have insurance on
No, you're very right, Pauline. It doesn't have insurance on that,
it.
and it does need. You will also need your public liability insurance and everything like that. So, so yeah, that's another cost that groups need to consider. As we mentioned, DBS checks. If you are going to have young people on, you need DBS checks. They're £20 at the moment for a standard one per person. They need to be done per project as well. They're not done separately.
Just to add to that, I don't know if it might help, but there's something called the DBS update service. So when you do a DBS check, you can actually then the individual, it belongs to the individual, so the individual has to subscribe, but you then have, it's an annual subscription for, I don't know if a volunteered DBS is less, I'm talking about it from the purposes of a work environment, but you then have, obviously you've got adult workforce certificates, you've got children's workforce, you can then get a combined adults and children's workforce certificate.
Oh, okay.
But you can then attach, as long as you enroll in the DBS update service within, I think it's 30 days of the certificate being issued, you will then, that attaches it to your record, and you can give permission to people to check it. They can't check it without your permission.
Yeah.
And they have to have authority to check that particular workforce. So I could go to a school with a children with an adult workforce certificate and then say you've got permission to check my DBS, because they wouldn't have the right to.
But if you had both adult and children,
I've got both.
Okay, that's.
And then you just keep that up, and it means that it literally means you can give permission to someone as long as you've got the original certificate to show them as well.
Right.
And then give them permission. It then records any changes that might have happened since the original certificate.
Everyone on site.
No, everyone on site doesn't need one. It's whoever is going to be dealing with the children involved. So if you've got one person who's going to be
In an unsupervised situation.
in an unsupervised situation, exactly. But it's something to bear in mind. There will be time for questions at the end, because I'll get through, because otherwise we won't
One
get time.
thing,
Yeah.
if they bring their parents along, if
Then
it's
you don't need
children,
Then you're fine.
we always specify that when we do events.
Yes, it does help if you have children, but these are all things to consider in terms of your costs. So permissions, do you have permission from the project for your landowner, your county council, or your local planning authority, your council? And these are all things to consider. And then, do you have the sufficient funds, or can you get the sufficient funds to actually run your project for the length that you want to do? Does your project, do your members of your group, are they willing to fund this, or are you going to go externally? And these are all things that you need to consider before starting a project. So things to consider: how are you publishing your results? Are you going to go for a full, proper, academic archaeological journal, or a self-published booklet, website? Obviously, the KAS website can host reports, so we can quite easily do that. But they, depending on how you publish your results, they are going to have a cost involved in doing it. What equipment do you need? As SWAG have very kindly offered, they have lots that they could potentially borrow. But your own group needs to consider: do you have enough equipment? How are you going to do it? And then post-excavation. This is the largest cost faced by archaeologists generally, but definitely after your work is done. And it's often the one that is, as I say, most overlooked. So quickly, what post-ex is: It's what happens to all the finds and all the drawings and reports and everything you put together after the site is done. It's a complex process, often taking longer than the dig itself. Your finds assessment. So as I mentioned, you should already know roughly what kind of finds you might encounter and be prepared, with specialists. The best thing to do is to have conversations with your find specialist as early as physically possible, because they can provide you the guidance on what you might encounter, how to sample it, how to record it, what to do with it at the end. And then any kind of scientific analysis. Everyone has probably heard of radiocarbon dating. It's a really useful tool. And just a quick show of hands, how many people have ever tried to get radiocarbon dating or wouldn't even know where to begin?
Wouldn't know where to begin.
Okay, I'm imagining that's most people's response, which hopefully I'll be able to answer in a second. So some ballpark figures. Pottery tends to be about £1,000 for an assessment for a report of a small assemblage. So 2 to 3 of your standard mushroom frames that I think most of us have used on site at some point. Bulk glass and metalwork, maybe £500 each for a report on a small assemblage. Again, 1 to 2 small trays. Small assemblage of work stone, early glass, charcoal, etc. Maybe £300 each, give or take on the specialist. Archaeobotanicals, £1,000 for assessment of plots and report, another £1,000 for full analysis. And then carbon dates, which vary depending on how quickly you need the results turned around. But SUARC are currently the cheapest at the moment, £325 a sample, or £425 if you want a faster turnaround of 1.5 to 2 months rather than 5. Which, to be fair, 5 months is pretty fast for a So, how do we afford them? There are a number of grant-giving bodies which would be worth approaching. CBA Southeast, which I sit on the committee on, which is why it's on there as well. So we can generally give up to £1,000 to £1,500 for field work. That's covering all of the Southeast, so Kent, Sussex, and Surrey. Local trusts like the William and Edith Oldham Trust, they particularly focus on farming and Maidstone, but they are willing to discuss giving funds to other local groups in Kent. Obviously, other local heritage societies sometimes have their own funding. The KS, we have our own fieldwork grant. We can give up to £1,000 for a project through the Archaeology Research Group, which myself and Keith sit on. Or if for more than that, we'd have to go to the Board of Trustees. But do get in touch with me if you have a project that you're looking for funding for, and we can discuss how that would move forward. Research groups, Society of Medieval Archaeology, Prehistoric Society, Roman Society, the Roman Society and the Society for the Promotion of Roman Studies, they all give grants. The Later Prehistoric Finds Group, we give grants as well. And there are multiple others which you can search for online, and potentially one of the suggestions from today, we could post that somewhere on the website of a list of potentially relevant grant giving bodies. But often those larger ones like the Heritage Lottery Fund will need to be applied for long-term, large-scale projects like the Randall Manor project. But yeah, you can find the grant schemes for the Council for British Archaeology on their website, and they give a list of other relevant ones. But this one, for those who are wanting to do radiocarbon dating, there is the Community Archaeology Radiocarbon Dating or CARD Fund, which is from Archaeology Research Services and SUARC. You can apply through that fund for radiocarbon dates. So it's well worth having a research if you've got relevant samples. If you think you might have, but you don't know, get in touch with them anyway, and they're more than happy to provide advice on whether your sample is potentially useful for radiocarbon dates. So, very quick run through of funding. So we'll now open it up to people that have questions. issues, suggestions, we're all ears.
I think there's also something about upskilling the volunteers to do some of this work.
Yes.
That is something we've been interested in and trying to do some of our own upskilling, but obviously hit a wall, and we really need that kind of practical input, perhaps to improve our own skills, to do some of the post-ex work ourselves. And it's funding, how one would fund that and who we could go to, which would be particularly interest to us.
Yes, no, and that's a very good point, and it's something that KAS have looked at in terms of running workshops with specialists for our member groups. So, for example, we've in the past run pottery workshops with Ed Biddulph from Oxford Archaeology, and we could probably do quite a few others. I know some of the Canterbury group would potentially be willing to run workshops on animal bone or small finds. I can do some recording and training as well, and more than I've come out and done training for the limb group. And so if you have got things that you are particularly looking for, do get in touch. And I think now that the website, the new website is up and running, then I will be chatting to Jacob about where we could host information on which specialists are active, how you would maybe fund them, how you'd get in touch. Because most specialists, I think, are pretty keen on coming out and giving workshops. And definitely the idea of upskilling groups to get them to be able to at least do the initial assessment, you know, pottery, for example, or animal bone, knowing how to catalogue it, how to record it, what you need and what needs to go for further specialist analysis is something that, yeah, we can definitely look into how we provide that.
That would be hugely helpful, I think, I'm sure to lots of people.
Yeah. Louise, you had a question?
Yeah, I actually, obviously I've got the background in physio, that's how I came into it. And a lovely chat actually had is Robert asking about what she came in biomedicine as well. We look at bones in a very different way. She's somebody's done up at the university and then gone on. But so I did all these, I've just looked at the cremation area from Leesport last year. I sorted through 9 kilos of material, and it was all of some size of a grain's rice. Sorted through, pulled out all the bones, or anything I thought was identifiable, seeds, shells. I began to find what I thought were microliths, so I pulled all those out, separated it all out into bags. Now gone back to Andy with the rest of the chalk, hopefully we can possibly back at these 4. But because I've now done that, hopefully it's reduced the costs for KAS now to be able to send this out to the relevant specialists to be able to be looked at properly, you know, that bit. I'm also starting work with Lynn on their animal bones because I've got a background in that. I have to say I'm doing some archaeology on my brain, digging out all the 30 years of information. I can't believe how quickly it's coming flooding back. And I'm seeing gaps in material that can access online, etc. So I'm thinking about that. Now, I would be Fred, I'm teaching them as I go, to come out to other groups to use that knowledge now. I don't want to waste it now for so long. So yeah, I am volunteering myself to do that work. I've got extensive human bone knowledge and the animal bones coming back rapidly.
Thank you, Louise. Yeah, no, exactly. But, you know, the good thing is, as part of KAS members, when you sign up, you put your interest in. This is something we're looking into. How do we pull that information to see whether there are people with relevant skills that might be able to take forward? You know, for example, JT coming out and teaching a group how to do resistivity surveys, or providing the information, or providing the equipment. I can come out and do small finds for people. We can get pottery specialists in, and what would be really good at some later stage, and I know Canterbury is working on this, is to have a pottery reference collection for the county, at least a digital one where, you know, if you've got your Roman pottery on your site and you don't know where to start, this is where, I mean, I'm having to learn pottery as I go, doing some of our projects. I've had to learn flint as I go, and like you say, it's that starting point of how you start doing that learning, and then and that's something that the KAS are very eager to be able to bring forward.
Ask a question?
Yeah.
You mentioned that we've recently lost Martin Ryan and Nigel in the fossil plant. We've also just lost Albert Daniels on bone recognition plant. Do we have anybody who could replace Albert?
Replace is probably not the word, but what I mean is, in terms of the knowledge, that the problem is, for the specialists like Malcolm and Nigel and Albert, they were doing it for so long that any specialist, new specialist that is coming up is never going to have that level of knowledge yet. But there are, specialists working in the county on zoo archaeology. So the Treasure Finds Liaison Assistant, John Whitmore, I'm in talks with him about producing some guidance on animal bone, as kind of a way to move that forward through the county. Obviously, we have got Canterbury Archaeological Trust. They have their find specialists that can do animal bone and small finds and other things. So there are specialists out there. It's finding a way to make that centrally known to everyone. I think it's the way to go.
And I mean, what's quite significant is just the size of the county. So
Yeah.
I guess in some respects, it's about how we can ensure as well that access is there when we're obviously looking at the side and the DBRP, T-bar, we've been really lucky with what we've been able to do there. But I'm just thinking, I guess in some respects, if it's about how we can spread some of that across the county itself, because I guess it's feeling how you can access things at the right time, but also, and I guess maybe putting that, if you can use the data from those hits would be really useful. So I think that would probably help everyone to see, okay, well, if I'm over this side of Kent, I can get to these people, and if I'm on this side, I can get to this people.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that we've done with the GIS on the KAS website, where we've got where each of the groups are located. We could do something similar with relevant experts or relevant specialists, where they are locally based or where their areas of work are. That's something that we can definitely look into. The main thing is, unfortunately, even with Badger and CIFA, that even that isn't that centralized. It doesn't have every specialist. It won't have all the freelancers because they may not be part of CIFA, or they may not have added themselves to the Badger website. So it's for us to find out who those people are, what their rates are, do they do community work. So, for example, I'm looking at getting some lipid analysis done, so analysing animal fats on some pottery. And very kindly, universities, both in Bristol and Bradford, have offered to do it for free because we are a local group, and it's a one-off. So it's worth contacting universities as well. That's a very useful direction to go with, because often, one, they have specialists there that may have research aims that they've got to try and meet through an academic year, but also they have students who are always on the lookout for new projects, for training on pottery, training on animal bone, training on metalwork. So they are always worth getting in touch with. Conservation as well, if you have finds that need conservation. Obviously, we only really have one active archaeological conservator in Kent, which is Dana Goodburn-Brown at CSI Sittingbourne, which means she's swamped. So trying to get any rapid conservation done can be tricky and expensive. So universities are quite a good option as well to consider for other options.
Andy,
Yes.
is it worth, if such place, for instance, you've got some pottery you want looking at, is it worth making it to CAS so they can go out to other groups and say, is anybody else out there looking for any pottery identification? So it can be grouped together and save money?
Yeah, that actually would probably work as quite a good way, because obviously, you are going to get a one-off payment, for example, if you were to ask for an assessment. So, for example, if you were to send, say, animal bone off to the zoo archaeology unit at Cardiff, they have an admin fee that they charge. Even for community groups, they will charge a small admin fee. And their advice is send us as much as you can in one go, even if it's from different sites, different groups, because then you will only be charged once. So yeah, no, that is a useful option, and it might be that we could quite easily put calls out to say, this group is looking for an assessment. Are there any other nearby groups looking at similar pottery? Because obviously you've got different pottery specialists that might want to only look at the Roman stuff or prehistoric and things like that. But yeah, that's definitely an option for groups to combine their works together.
One thing which should be considered early in the planning stage is the eventual fate of the excavation archive, finds, documentation and so on. Probably many groups would think of a local museum which it should go to, but that museum should be one which is accredited under the scheme which is administered by the Arts Council. And that museum would very much welcome having prior warning that possibly quite substantial amount of material may arrive suddenly on their doorstep.
Yes.
And they will need to plan for that. This will be coming up again under the we can't take any more.
It will
session
indeed.
later.
Yes.
I think it does need to be borne in mind early in the planning.
Oh, absolutely. The eventual location of your archive needs to be the number one thought of anything that you do before you go anywhere near digging. As I will explain in the We Can't Take Any More, unfortunately, most museums are full, but they may be able to advise on how to best apply discard policies and strategies to your archive so that any eventual deposition is minimized on them, but also the storage costs or storage strain that those archives provide is minimized on your group as well. Because I'm sure there are plenty of people here who have had archives sat in their garage, house, loft, much to the annoyance of their other halves. And obviously it's not the best place for the archaeology. So yeah, I will get onto that in the next talk, in my next talk.
Just a couple of things on the commissions. More gigs are being photographed and filmed,
Yes.
and we found you need to get model release things signed off before people come on, particularly for children.
Yes.
Because some parents object to their children being filmed and published in a local paper or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point to raise. And although it's not a cost, so to speak, it's still something worth considering in the planning stage because, yeah, people may not want their faces on social media and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's something to bear in mind.
There's one other thing on in our experience, if you hold a workshop with a local group, people are quite willing to pay 5 or 10 quid to attend the workshop, and so it can be funded.
Yeah.
An expert can be funded in that way.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is something that for kind of expert workshops, you would most likely not pay for it, purely to cover the cost of that expert, especially if you are getting an expert who is not local and is traveling down from somewhere. Then that needs to be borne in mind as well. Lindsay?
Is there a standardised document or format for setting up permissions with landowners available, or are these bespoke?
They are bespoke. There is no, unfortunately, there is no real standardised form to say to a landowner, look, can I go and dig? Metal detectorists have one. There is one for that, but obviously a very different thing. For actual fieldwork, you kind of do have to do it on a site-by-site basis.
Where was access an example?
That is, as John raised it, a lot of them will be confidential. It's something. They do. They have one for metal detectorists, but not for general, for community field work and things like that.
The process of looking for the NFU,
Mm.
not combined with the line of the national.
Yeah, National Council for Metal
How
Detectorists.
do we incorporate the right aspects in relation to excavation, fieldwork, and other?
Yes.
I'm looking for some guidance. Maybe you might make a note of that.
Yeah, that's definitely something that KS could put forward as a potential guide on. This is the kind of things that you need to be considering for landowners.
It's particularly sensitive because some of this is retrospective. As the project's going.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that one. Yeah. No, that does make it a tad more tricky.
But we put the landowners sort of sitting there, had been waiting for this document to come in retrospective.
Right.
Anyway, I wouldn't
Yeah.
mind the opportunities to push that further.
Yeah. No, I think because I think probably quite a few groups, would benefit from a document of that.
Without wanting to overburden any care officer, if an open group got a question along the lines that they want further advice on, who's the best person at KS to approach in the first instance?
It depends on what the question is. If it is fines related, then it would be me. If it is to do with your paper archives, it would be Craig Campbell, who is our archives officer. If it is to do with fieldwork in general, then it would be Richard Taylor, who's our general manager and fieldwork director, or obviously Keith at the back. So yeah, it does depend on the question. Obviously, if you put it through to the general contact details on our website, it'll go through to Jacob, who will then post it to the relevant person. So yeah, we're always happy to have in touch. And as others have said, I certainly try to respond to every email that I get where I can. If it's something that I can advise on, then I will.
Can I throw in that rather thorny question of excavation licenses, if you might have something? That's something I've discovered as I've come back into.
Yes.
Not in existence when I did.
No. So if you think that your project is going to even have the slimmest chance of encountering human remains of any form, cremation or intact inhumations, you really should apply for a exhumation license from the Ministry of Justice. It's very easy to do. It's an online form. I'm happy. I've done a couple of. They don't do a retrospective. So if you do find human remains on your site, they won't do a retrospective form, but they can provide a letter, which is sort of a retrospective form. It's a bit of a grey area. But if you do have anything like that, do get in touch. I'm more than happy to provide advice on where to go, what you need to fill in, and what you should do next.
And they are free. Still.
And they are free. Yes, you don't have to pay for
them.
them.
Free. Someone slipped up there. I think.
Yeah, someone's not realised they can charge for that.
That's worth £100. So.
They're not really. They do ask some things that local groups might not have the knowledge or information to hand, but you can fill them in. I have filled them in for ours. Typically, they will ask you to rebury on site or find a suitable repository. Now, as we know, museums are full, and there are ethical guidelines on the treatment of human remains and what you should do with them and where they should go, which you need to bear in mind if you think your project is going to encounter human remains. I think that's probably time for a tea break. Thank you very much. Do you want me to end that